Hey guys, I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of a big paper 2 question. So I picked the one from the spec, and that's going to be 2B. Now I like this one because it does use a procedure, and so it lets us see how we write the procedures in here. So this is for a hospital. We're going to have a patient, and a patient is going to have a bunch of readings. Now this one's a 1D array, so this is going to be the patient names. And then we're going to have a 2D array, and that contains the temperature and the pulse rate. So it's going to be a n by 2 array, or 2D array. So let's have a think about this. Now, first of all, remember you do not need to bother making the arrays themselves. That is not required. However, as I said to you before, when I'm doing this, I like to just draw out so I can visualize what our arrays are going to look like, because I find it makes life easier. So let's start by making the patient array. Okay, so patient is going to equal, now let's say we had 3 people on our array. Now, one thing that we have to factor in, first of all, is this hospital number. So the hospital number is going to be the index for the array. Therefore, if the patient is the first patient, they're going to be index 0. But our numbers go from 1 to 1000. So that gives us a bit of a design choice. Now, what I'm going to do with mine is I'm just going to ignore it. So I'm going to put my first one as none. Okay, so I'm going to have an empty first patient, and I've seen you spelled patient wrong, which is stupid about that. So we've got our patient, and I'm going to have none, and then I'm going to have 3 patients after that. So I'm going to have Ada, and I'm going to have Bob, and I'm going to have, is there any 3-letter? No, can't think of one. Very American, let's go for Chad, okay? Don't know why that's such an American name, but it sounds like an American name to me. And then I need a 2D array called readings. Now again, we don't need any data in the first block because I'm just going to ignore that first block. And then I'm going to have the data for Ada, the data for Bob. And now I've said these are going to be 2 by 2, or 2, sorry, not 2 by 2. The subarrays are each going to be 2. And they're each going to have 2 bits of data in them. So then let's have a look here. So the temperature readings should be in the range 1.6 to 7.2. So let's set up my people here. Ada is going to be the person who's normal. Bob is going to have a bad temperature. And Chad is going to have a bad temperature and a bad pulse. I could possibly put in a D just to test it out. But let's just try it with these 3 to keep it simple. So I'm going to do 3.1 for her temperature, and her pulse is going to be 70.5. Oops, 70.6. There we go. Okay, now for Bob, I want the temperature to be wrong. So let's say that Bob's temperature is really high. So let's put him as 38.3. But we want his pulse reading to be normal, so let's put that at 75.5. Okay, so that's going to fit in that range. And then Chad, poor sick Chad, his temperature is going to be wrong, and his pulse reading is going to be wrong. So let's make them both quite low for Chad. So let's do 30.1 for his first reading, and let's do 45.6. Apologies if this means somebody's dead or whatever. I'm just going by this data here. Okay, so there we go. Now I've got some test data in there, and I can hopefully visualize what the test is going to look like, what the program is going to be doing with it a bit better. Again, I'd suggest you do actually write out an example. It says we don't need to initialize things, but it just makes it so much easier to write our code. Also, if we've done something like the none thing at the start, then the examiner gets a better idea of what's going on. Okay, so our next step, now that we've got our example, is... Now, and comments are very important, so don't forget comments. So this is going to be setup maybe initialize. Let's do initialize the arrays. Okay, and then I need to think about what else am I going to need in my program. Okay, so we're going to take the hospital number as a parameter, so I'm going to need the hospital number. Output's an error message. No, I don't need a variable for there. Now, output normal readings, output warning, output severe. So maybe I'm going to need a variable here for the status. And then that seems to be it. So there's not too much to create here. But when we decompose our task, it's really helpful if we look for what possible variables or arrays might we need in our program. So I'm going to just set up here. Let's set up our, I can't call it output because that's going to cause confusion. So let's call it status. And we'll make that empty. Now, again, I should write a comment to go along with it to say contains the status of the patient to be output. And it is a string. Okay, so probably if we're doing anything at this point, we probably want to mark what data types we have in here. So our patient is going to be a string array. Now remember, for Python, you can include multiple data types in the lists because they're not actually arrays, but in pseudocode and other languages we can't. So this is going to be a float in Python, slash, I always forget what it's called, a real, sorry, or a real in pseudocode. Okay, so I'm going to have these values, and I'm going to have these comments to go with it. And again, the comments are really important. If we don't have those comments, we're going to have a problem. Okay, so now here is where I'd suggest you take, but obviously you have a read through the whole thing, but here I'd suggest you try and outline the basic steps that you're going to need in your program. Now, when you're doing this, you probably just obviously it's easier for me because I can put them into my code. So I'd suggest doing it on a separate piece of paper and just writing down the steps and ticking them off as you go along. But I would also suggest putting them in as your comments. So again, I can get away with it being easy for me. So the steps of the program are this, and I'm just going to change each of these to be comments, and you can do the same if you like. So our first step, it says there quite clearly, is that we're going to take the hospital number as a parameter. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it says we're doing a procedure. And now those of you been paying attention in life will know that a procedure is like a function, but it does not have a return value. Now, design decision here, I could have these as part of the main program, or I could have these as part of the array. It doesn't matter which. So I'm going to have these as part of my main program. So let me actually put this other stuff up here because this is all going to be part of the procedure. Okay, now I could read these in as parameters, but it doesn't tell me to, so I don't want to lose marks. So what I'm going to do instead is make these global. And you'll see we'll do that in the actual function, procedure itself. So let's start by making the procedure. And the procedure has to be called... Does it tell us the name of the procedure? Write procedure. I don't see in here anywhere that it gives us the name. Okay, no, it doesn't. So let's call it check patient because that's what's happening in here. Okay. Oops, sorry, wrong window. So we are going to define. We are going to define check patient. Okay, bracket, followed by a colon. Okay, so it says we're going to take the hospital number as a parameter. So now, again, you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to save time, I'm going to call it HN, I'm going to call it B, I'm going to call it something. Make your variable names clear, or you will lose points. It's better to write a longer variable name than for you to not get the points in the exam. So it tells us to take hospital number, so we write it as hospital number. We don't try and make it shorter. Okay. Now I could extend my comment here, so I'm going to say, no, not function, procedure. That takes the hospital number parameter and return and prints the info for that patient. Okay. Now again, yours maybe don't need to be as verbose as mine, but it may help. Okay. Now, as I said, I'm going to use these in my program. Now, status, I probably want to put inside of the procedure. And again, I'm aware me copying and pasting stuff that is way easier than you guys writing it in the exam, but it is the way it is. And then these ones here, I'm going to have as global. So global patient and global readings. Now, global is often frowned upon, but they use it a lot in A-level, and basically as long as it works, we should get the mark. Now let's call this the main program. Okay, so I basically pulled these into up here. I've made a status variable, and I don't think there's any other variables I need, but if I was writing this in the exam, I would leave a decent amount of space so that I could add stuff later, especially to that initialization section. Set up the arrays as global arrays. Okay, so again, comments are your friend. You're not going to lose marks for writing too much, but you may lose marks by not writing enough. Anywho, okay, so then we've got this, we've got status, I think that's all it needs. So the first thing we have to do is check that the hospital number is valid. And again, I'd suggest using the specs and the words in the specs just to make it clear what you're doing at each stage. So what does it say about the hospital number? So the hospital number, here. So the hospital number is used for the index on both arrays. This value is between 1 and 1000 inclusive, and that keyword there is inclusive, which means 1 and 1000 are accepted results. Okay, so if the number is valid, so we check the number is valid and outputs an error message and exits the program if it's not valid. So all we want to say there is if hospital number is less than 1 or the hospital number is greater than 1000, then we are going to print, sorry, not a valid hospital number. Now again, if it asks you, you will lose marks, or you won't gain marks, or I should probably say, you won't gain marks for not having appropriate messages. So just write it out. Write it out in a clear way. It's better to write too much and have a long print here than to lose the mark. Okay, so, and that's this bit here. So outputs a error message if the number is not valid. So I can stick that there. I mean, I can stick it underneath, but let's put it in there so we know what's going on. And then I'm going to have an else. Oops. And I'm going to have an else. Now, there we go. So otherwise, if the hospital number is valid, so again, I can just take that and write it in there, if the hospital number is valid. So what am I going to do? Output the patient's name. Okay, so I'm going to print, and I'm going to get the patient's name from the patient array, which is down there. So, getting messy here. So, down here, so patient 1 will be Ada, patient 2 will be Bob, patient 3 will be Chad. So if we want to do that, all we have to do is patient, if I can spell, and in there, as the index, it says we're going to use the hospital number. So our hospital number should allow us to do that. So we're going to print the hospital number. So that's output the patient's name. Output normal readings if both values are with range. Output warning, output severe warning. Okay, so now here we've got a bit of a design decision. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have flags for the different criteria. Okay, so I'm going to have, let's say, I could call it reading, no, sorry, let's call it something more sensible. So the first one is the temperature, and the second one is the pulse. So let's call it temp equals 0, and that's going to be a real 2. No, sorry. That's going to be a Boolean. Let's not call it temp, let's call it temp status. Okay, and that's going to be a Boolean to note if the temp is out of range. Now you could be more specific here, and you could say false equals in range. Okay, just to make it clear as to what's going on. And then we could have pulse status equals false, and that's going to be almost the same thing. Boolean to note if the pulse is out of range. And again, let's be clear, because we're not going to lose marks for being too clear. We're going to lose marks for not being clear enough. So false equals in range. Okay, so now that I have got these, basically I'm going to check if the temperature is in the range. If it is, then I'm going to set it to blah. Otherwise, I'm going to check if the pulse is in range, and I'm going to set it to blah. Oops, checks if the pulse. Checks if the pulse is in range. Okay, so how do I do that? Now, the important thing to note here is this is going to happen inside of the else. Now, I could switch these around. Maybe that's going to be easier, and I could do the else at the bottom, but whatever works, okay? So, that's going to happen in this else section. So I printed the hospital number, and now I want to check the readings. So let's say what I'm doing in a comment. Check the temperature. Okay, so I'm going to say okay, so if the readings, now what's going to be the index for that? Well, the index for that is going to be the hospital number, and the temperature is in position 0. Okay, so that's getting the temperature from here, so that's going to be 31 because it's 0, 1 is our hospital number, and 0 is the temperature. So if the reading's hospital number is less than Now, again, here we have to go back to our little script and see what's going on, is less than 31.6, or the same thing again, is greater than 37.2. Then we want to take our temperature status and set that to be true. Okay, now we don't want to do elif, we want to do an if again. So these are two separate conditions. So we want to do if, now almost the same thing, I'm just going to steal that whole line. I'm going to change it to be the pulse, let's just check, it's called pulse, isn't it? No, it's not, it's still readings. sorry, I'm being stupid here. It's still called readings. Let's go back. And it's this number here that's going to change for the pulse. So because the pulse is in position number 2, we're going to change that to be a 1 and a 1. Okay. So, now again, if you got time, I'd suggest you'd write it out on paper, make all your mistakes like I'm making now, and then copy a nice clean version onto the page, if you have time. Yeah? So most people have more than enough time. Now here, I want to not call it temp status, I want to call it pulse status. Okay, so now I get to my output. So I want to start by saying, let's start with them both. Okay, now you can probably write this in nice fancy ways. I'm just going to write it for clarity. So then I'm going to say if temp status and pulse status. Now remember that that's the same as writing if temp status equals true. Okay, same thing, but you can just write if temp status because it will become a Boolean anyway. So if temp status and pulse status, then I'm going to print severe warning. And so I need to print severe warning and the names of the two readings. Severe warning, pulse, and temperature. Okay, so if we've got both those situations, then we do that. Okay, now I'm going to steal this bit here and again put that in as my comment. Okay, then I'm going to have an elif. Let's check the temperature. Elif temp status. Now here the order that we do things is important. So if I put if temp status first, then that would do the temperature issue. That would do the temperature first. And so it would be harder to check if both were wrong. So you need to think about the order in which you're going to do things in. So otherwise I'd have to write it with a bit more clarity or a bit more something. Anyway, so output warning if the name is out of range. So that's this line here. So else temp status, and we're going to print warning, and the name of the reading is temperature. Okay, so that's if the temperature is out of range. So if they're both out of range, do this. Otherwise, if one of them's out of range, write that. So then the next one is going to be almost the same. Another elif, and this elif, again, I can repeat the comment, it's fine. And this is going to be pulse status. And And I'm going to change the warning to say pulse. Now, by default, we know that if both are not true, if one of the so if we know these, then we know by default that everything is within the normal range. Okay, and so we can print normal readings. Okay, cool. And then we exit the procedure. Maybe don't need that line. Oops, Mr. Bracket, stupid teacher. But we'll just put it at the end because, again, it's not going to do us any harm to make it clear. Okay, so hopefully, I think that is all that we're being asked in this program. Not too hard, this one, actually. I might try and do another one that's a bit more difficult, but I think that's what we want to be. Now, I will share this on Classroom as well, but let's just test it first, because probably I've made some mistakes. Let's find out where I've made my mistakes. So, how do I call my function? Well, I just take the name of it, check patient. Let's check patient. And first of all, let's check for the invalid situation. And then, so let's save this as check patient. Okay, now if I run this, sorry, not a valid hospital number, yay! Now if I do patient number 1, hopefully that's going to give me Ada, and hopefully the readings are going to be normal. Oh no, warning pulse. Okay, so have I done something wrong, either with my info or up here? So let's see, what have I done wrong? Oh, I forgot to update this information here. Oh no, okay, so I would have lost a mark there. Again, this is maybe because I'm being lazy and copying and pasting, but I forgot to change this here, which is bad. Okay. Let's try again. Okay, so now Ada has normal readings. Now, hopefully, Bob should, I hope, have a bad temperature. I believe we said. So let's change it to Bob. Yay, Bob has a temperature warning, and Chad should have a double warning. So let's check patient number 3. Ooh, severe warning, pulse and temperature. Cool. Now I could make a 4th person. Let's call him or her. I think of a girl, but let's call him Dawn. Okay. Don't know why it has to be A, B, C, D. And now Dawn is only going to have a problem with his pulse. So let's put 33.1. Oops. Let's do 33.1 because I know Ada's thing is right. And then I want the pulse to be out of range. So what's the pulse being out of range going to say? Pulse out of range is greater than 100 or less than whatever. Okay, so let's put it greater than 100 for the pulse. So 101. And then let's check patient number 4. And hopefully we should get a pulse issue. Yay! Okay, so you can run through it using, again, you don't have the advantage of having a compiler in the exam. You're going to have to just run it through in your brain, but it's good to take a couple of examples and just check and see what you're getting at. Okay, hope that helps, guys. I'll try and make a few more of these for the for this final paper. And good luck with the upcoming exam. Bye-bye.